Hello and welcome to Writing Today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about the journey of a hero to villain. In other words, the fall from grace when a hero decides to go down a darker path to achieve their goals and ends up turning into the antagonist. As always, you can read this blog post on my website, thepennedsleuth.com. There's a link to that in the description below, as well as a link to my writer's workshop if you are interested in some premium writing education. From writing courses to a coaching program, this writer's workshop has all that you need to write a novel you can be proud of. With that said, let's get straight into the topic. Heroes and villains are the staples of storytelling. We love to root for the underdog, witness their triumphs, and see them rise to greatness. But what happens when that hero falls? When they become the very thing they once fought against? That is the fall from grace. From Shakespeare's Macbeth to Breaking Bad's Walter White, we are fascinated by characters whose descent into villainy is gradual, yet inevitable. These stories have captivated us for centuries, leaving us with a sense of moral ambiguity. Can these characters ever truly be redeemed? Is there a hope for them? Or are they doomed to suffer the consequences of their actions? Through examining some examples from literature and popular culture, today I aim to shed light on how authors establish characters as heroes before foreshadowing their eventual downfall. We will explore external and internal factors that trigger a character's descent into darkness. I'm also going to be talking about the aftermath of a character's descent. Is there a chance of redemption, or have they gone too far? Ultimately, when it comes to writing these characters, we are trying to create a lesson for the reader to understand and enjoy. And the beauty of the fall from grace character type is that it challenges our perceptions of morality. It does this by introducing a complex character whose motivations aren't black and white. So it's no wonder that these morally ambiguous stories capture the reader's attention even to this day. So with the fall from grace character type explained, we now need to talk about how to write it, starting first with the early signs that a reader will receive about the character's downfall. The moment a character is introduced to a story, the reader forms an impression of them. The author has the responsibility to establish the character as a hero, regardless of whether they are the protagonist or not. This sets up the audience's expectations and helps them become invested in their journey. However, it is equally important for authors to foreshadow their downfall. Early signs of a character's downfall can manifest in different ways. Sometimes it is an internal conflict that slowly chips away at their resolve and morality. Other times it's external factors which push them towards self-destructive behavior. One example I'm going to refer to multiple times throughout this episode is Anakin Skywalker from Star Wars. He was introduced as a young Jedi with immense potential and was expected to bring balance to the Force. However, his fear of losing those he loved pushed him toward the dark side, resulting in his transformation into Darth Vader. Another example, as I mentioned earlier, was Walter White from Breaking Bad, initially presented as an underpaid high school chemistry teacher who started cooking meth for financial reasons due to his cancer diagnosis. He eventually becomes consumed by greed and power. Creating such internal conflicts is a challenge in itself, but certainly a necessary step in creating this character type. This is important groundwork also to be laid out for the reader to better understand how the character reached from such highs to such lows, why they made the decisions that they did. And not only does it help the reader better understand this character, but even empathize with them at times. With that said, you also want to make sure that these early signs of their downfall are not so obvious. You want to make them subtle enough that the reader will gradually build the picture up in their head, rather than believe that this is going to be the way the story was going all the time. These early signs also become a lot more noticeable upon later reflection or through a reread or rewatch. So in the beginning, certainly set up your character as the hero that they are, but then as time goes by, introduce these subtle hints that they're going to be taking steps that are not exactly morally sound. This is essential for capturing that feeling of the fall from grace that we know so well in stories and media. Characters are not born villains, at least not most of them. There is usually a turning point that triggers their descent from grace. It's essential to establish these catalysts for change in the story to create a convincing transformation. Now, the external factors are sometimes referred to as the call of adventure, when an event or situation outside of the character's control sets them on a path toward destruction. At least in this case, sometimes the call of adventure is a call to a higher purpose, to do good rather than be something of a mediocre character in the story. The internal factors, as I mentioned earlier, are those within the character themselves that lead them down a self-destructive path. These can be past traumas or flaws in their personality that make them vulnerable to temptation. In The Great Gatsby, Jay Gatsby's obsession with winning back Daisy stems from his insecurities about his working-class background and lack of social status. His pursuit of wealth and status ultimately leads him down a path toward tragedy. Sometimes characters respond in unexpected ways when faced with these catalysts for change. They may embrace their newfound power or become consumed by revenge or anything else that might be motivating them, leading them further down the path of destruction. Another example in Game of Thrones, Daenerys Targaryen starts off as an innocent girl sold into marriage by her abusive brother, but transforms into the Mad Queen after experiencing numerous betrayals and losses along her journey. Her desire for power becomes all-consuming as she seeks revenge on those who have wronged her. Both Jay Gatsby and Daenerys Targaryen are victims of external factors that led them down a darker path. That's not to say they didn't take the steps consciously, so the blame still rests heavily on them for their actions. But certainly they were presented with challenges that they weren't able to pass. And it's important to note that these catalysts don't always have negative consequences. They can also inspire positive growth or change within characters. These are the positive results. These are characters passing the challenge. For example, Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games is initially motivated by survival, but becomes a symbol of resistance against the oppressive capital. She is inspired to fight for what is right, even if it means putting her own life on the line. So when it comes to these catalysts for change, these internal and external factors, to me they are just phrases for conflict. Conflict that challenges a character's values and personality, helps them to grow or to crumble under difficult circumstances. Some characters will certainly take the darker route and others will take a better one. Sometimes conflicts help improve a character and other times it helps degrade them. It's up to the character themselves to make the decision under this pressure. So whether it is an internal or external factor that forces them into this position, it's still on the character themselves to make the decision. Having now talked about the catalysts, the factors that triggered the character's descent, now we need to shift our focus to the transformation from hero to villain. This is a crucial point in a character's journey as it marks a fundamental shift in their moral compass and actions. Characters often transform into villains due to a perceived threat or injustice that justifies their actions. They believe that they were doing what is necessary for their survival or the greater good. This justification can come from an external factor such as societal pressure or an internal factor like a personal trauma. In other words, this character now sees a challenge as confirmation of their beliefs and they double down on them. The transformation from hero to villain is not sudden, but gradual. It starts with small compromises of their values and beliefs until they cross a line they cannot come back from. One of the key factors in this transformation is the character's belief system. They convince themselves that what they are doing is right and necessary, leading them down a dangerous path toward villainy. Taking a previous example, Anakin Skywalker's belief that he was saving Padme by embracing the dark side ultimately led him to become Darth Vader. Another aspect of this transformation is how other characters react to it. Allies might become enemies, enemies might become allies. The consequences of their actions sometimes weigh heavier depending on the decisions they make. And these reactions will add complexity and depth to both the story and the characters. The impact of the transformation can sometimes extend beyond other characters and to the world space, the society itself. Now, despite all this complexity, there's one thing that all authors need to keep in mind, and that is that they are aiming for authenticity. This transformation shouldn't feel forced, otherwise it loses its impact. You've got to create a situation, a scenario, a scene where a character is being placed in a position that is too difficult for them to handle. And so they crumble because they lack the character to overcome the challenge, and they become this antagonist, this villain. It needs to be believable. The reader needs to empathize with them. If it is so forced, the reader will have a disconnect from this character, and thus the transformation of this character and the rest of the story lack the impact that it would have had it been a bit more authentic. The aftermath of a character's fall from grace is often just as important as the transformation itself. So let's talk about those consequences of the character's actions on themselves and those around them, as well as the potential for redemption and lessons to be learned. One of the most significant consequences of a character's fall from grace is the impact it has on themselves. They may experience guilt, shame, or regret for their actions. This internal struggle can lead to self-destruction or even suicide in extreme cases. For example, Macbeth in Shakespeare's play Macbeth suffers from severe guilt after murdering King Duncan and becomes increasingly paranoid until his eventual downfall. His wife as well. But a character's actions also have repercussions on those around them. As I said earlier, allies might become enemies and enemies might become allies. Innocent bystanders can be caught in the crossfire and suffer greatly because of their involvement with the fallen hero turned villain. And redemption is not always possible for characters who have fallen from grace. Such characters become so far removed from their former selves that they cannot return to who they once were. Others may try to make amends but are ultimately unsuccessful in redeeming themselves. However, there are cases where redemption is possible. If I was to refer to this example one more time, Darth Vader switches sides again in the last moments of his life in order to redeem himself. But most importantly, the aftermath of a character's fall from grace has a lesson that can be learned by the reader. These are lessons about life, about human nature, about morality. These can have the most impact on the reader, as they are meaningful lessons. These kinds of stories can teach us about forgiveness, about morality, redemption, and ethics. So to sum up, these kinds of stories can help us get better insight into ourselves and our actions. We can learn from these mistakes and triumphs and hopefully apply these lessons to our own lives in order to live a better life. So the story of a hero becoming a villain is not something to take lightly, but it's certainly a story that we can learn from. So here are some of my thoughts. When it comes to these kinds of stories, I really appreciate them. Because nowadays, stories are all about twists and shock factor, not anything meaningful. It's very rare for a story to include a lesson that we can learn from, especially one that can be as impactful as this. I hope you found this look into the journey from hero to villain informative and useful should you plan to write a story or include a character that has this kind of story in your novel. If you are experienced with this character type, perhaps share your thoughts on it and advice you would give beginner writers in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you're interested in some more premium writing education, there's a link to my writer's workshop in the description as well. At the top of the description is a link to my free writing course in case you want to check out my teaching methods first. And with that, good day, good night, and happy writing.